Namaste everyone. Welcome to the first of our weekly roundups where we give you our views on the headlining stories of the week that was past. Joining me in this roundup are Ashish and Rohit, our resident experts who you've heard on multiple podcasts before. So we'll begin with a few of the headlines from last week. Before that, hi Ashish, hi Rohit, how are you guys doing?
Doing good, Carrie. How are you?
Good.
All good, Carrie.
Yeah, so all right, guys, I know everyone's been waiting to talk about this. Let's talk about the Ram Mandir Bhumi Pujan, right? So, what do you guys think about this? Ashish?
Very big day, actually. Those of us who have lived through the 90s and how this changed the politics. I think only maybe some of the folks have not been able to gauge the significance, right? But the fact that this whole the movement changed the way politics was in India through the 90s, and then while it appeared to have gone on a back burner for a while, for about 10 years in between, the fact that we could resurrect this movement and that it was done with, the whole Bhumi Pujan was done with full government involvement and the PM himself appearing for it, has got a lot of signaling value. I think it's a very fundamental shift in the way politics is seen in India, and a very clear intent of how the rest of the term of the government may actually pass.
Right. Rohit, you were part of this fantastic episode that we did on the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. How was it watching the Bhumi Pujan on TV?
Yeah, so Carrie, I think it was, as Ashish said, obviously a very significant event, and I'd like to frame it but in a one-liner to say that in some ways it marked both, the beginning of the end as well as a new beginning. And what I mean by that is it was obviously the symbolic end of this whole Ram Mandir movement, right? In the sense that now it will take a lot of things to change dramatically and drastically for the temple not to be built. So just that way, it's sort of signals the beginning of the end. But more importantly, I think again, as Ashish just mentioned, it sort of signals a new way in which the Indian state conceives itself, right? And while the entire first term of the Modi government also was marked in several ways, where the Prime Minister did things that meant that he sort of showed his role in a slightly different manner from how the Indian Prime Minister has previously shown it. This was taking that up a new level, right? In the sense that sort of showing how the Indian Prime Minister has some sort of a religious role also, as in the sense that not as a priest or something, but the Indian state does have a extra dimensional role when it comes to Hinduism. And I think here a lot of us have read Abhinav Prakash's article, right, where he says how India should be seen as a reforming Hindu state. That's what it did right from independence by various things, whether it came to Hindu marriage laws, succession laws, abolishing the caste system, reservations, etc. And this is sort of the state being more open about what it is, right? And that is both being more open as well as changing the role. And that way, I think this is very significant in more ways than one. Apart from just being a Bhumi Pujan of a temple, that is quite important. That's of course relevant.
Ashish, any articles, op-eds that stand out? I know Rohit just mentioned Abhinav Prakash's article. Any others that you could recommend to our listeners?
Yes, Swapan Dasgupta wrote one in the Open magazine. Prasanna Rajan, who's the editor of Open, also wrote one. I think I would recommend those two definitely. But I would actually go back to November 2019 when the Supreme Court verdict had come. At that point of time, there were some really fantastic articles by Sandipan Deb, Kanchan Gupta, Swapan Dasgupta on this topic. And I would recommend people to search for those articles and read them. Very comprehensive view of what this means to the politics of the country and how the quote unquote Delhi consensus has been dismantled in the last 6-8 months with the closure of this episode.
Right. To me, I think it just is a more positive image to sort of retain in your head, right? Because anytime people mention the Ram Janmabhoomi movement or whatever, the image that you would kind of perceive as the Babri Masjid being demolished and coming down. But here we have the grandeur of the birthplace of Ram being celebrated, and this is a sort of a forward-looking image, I would say, right? Rohit, you mentioned, the Prime Minister being seen as as a religious figure, right? Not as a religious figure, but not afraid to kind of express his religious sentiments. Many perceive that as a sort of a rebuke to India's secular fabric. But what would you add to that?
I think, it would be very dishonest of me if I say that I disagree with people who say that it's a rebuke to the secular fabric of India, at least as it was conceived, if not in 1947, because that's still open to some discussion and debate, but at least how it was conceived from at least say 1952, or the time Jawaharlal Nehru became the um, leading figure of post-independent India till I think, yeah, till like very recently. So that is true, and the way Indian secularism has been conceived of till now, this is definitely a rebuke to that. And I think where people may disagree with is whether that's it's a welcome rebuke or a unwelcome rebuke, and that really goes back to how you see of India, right? As in whether you see India as a nation state that was formed in 1947, or whether you see India as in the Indian Republic as the latest embodiment of a political entity in what is known as the Indian subcontinent that has existed for more than 3,000 years. So that really looks at where you place the Indian Republic in history, and there is one view that was dominant during the vast majority of the Republic's time that disagrees with it, and there is the other view started, including by the Bharatiya Jansangh, which is today the BJP, that disagrees with this view. So it's not like people in the BJP or the Jansangh or even the RSS have ever been shy about the fact that they disagreed with the dominant view. That's why this party at least was created, and so that's that. Like,
Right.
you have differing views.
Okay, so we'll leave it at that. The other thing last week was the Mood of the Nation survey that came out. Plenty of interesting results. Ashish, do you want to set some context? What was interesting to you?
Yeah, I think there were three interesting topics here. One was on the COVID handling of the government. I mean, just to clarify, the survey is about 12,000 respondents, and it happens periodically. I mean, India Today has been doing the Mood of the Nation surveys for, I think, several years now. So with all the caveats of the process involved and the sampling methodology, etc., which we are not privy to, but it is what it is. So on the COVID handling, I think about 78% of the people, 77% of the people have been appreciative of how the government has handled COVID. Also, a lot of people feel that we have done better than other countries, mostly, or at least if not better than, at least as good as other countries. I think what comes out is that people trust PM's intent. I mean, you can go and do the skullduggery about when should have the lockdown been imposed, how severe should it have been, was it good enough in each state, or did states did not do their part, etc. All those questions can always, I mean, and I'm sure that India being the country it is, every state is so different from each other. So clearly the execution part would have been very, very different. But the fact that PM himself came out and spoke about it right in March, cancelling his holy function, which is where it started. I think it's the survey essentially just signals that people expected PM Modi to essentially guide them through the process, and they feel satisfied about the fact that he did that.
Right. No, I mean, no doubt it's been a tough year with Corona, with the economy, and it's, well, it is what it is, that the people, really trust the person that they've elected, right? Moving on, Rohit, here are some facts and figures for you. What do you think on the economy side of things?
Yeah, so Carrie, I think economy is where I mean there's clearly a huge disconnect here between what the survey says about the common people, or a wide sample set view of how the PM has handled the economy, and what is quote unquote elite consensus on it, right? And that I think comes from two different features, right? One is what a lot of us have been discussing on whether people disproportionately focus on what can be called reforms, right? Economic reforms, and whether it is land acquisition, labor reform, and the same same points have been told about for a bunch of years, and clearly there's a disinvestment, of course. There's clearly a feeling that Modi government hasn't delivered on some of those things. Then again, there is a disconnect in the sense that and being a bit blunt, I mean, before 2014 everyone wanted a GST. Now that there is a GST, everyone here, meaning opinion makers, seem to have a problem with the GST, which is couched in some sort of very unique language as it's an unimplementable GST. It's not what we thought was a GST, etc. Whatever it is, there is a GST, and clearly a lot of the same with the bankruptcy code. I mean, everyone wanted a bankruptcy code for a long time. Now that there is a bankruptcy code, people feel that nothing has been done. So I think leaving that aside, people look at the economy in a slightly different manner, and you always, I mean, this again goes back to your whole India shining debate, right? While Vajpayee government might not have lost because of India shining, there was clearly again what do you call it, disconnect between what sort of opinion makers felt and what the people felt, and that's always there because opinion makers have to look at the broader picture. However flawed that picture might be, but the average person is just looking at how things are going. And then the second thing is, of course, the corona thing, right? I mean, for some reason, Indian opinion makers have been believing that the Indian public will disproportionately punish the prime minister for the coronavirus. I mean, apart from the logical fallacy involved in punishing a human being for a virus, there is clear divergence in what is seen in India and every other country, right? I mean, even someone who's fairly unpopular like President Donald Trump got a massive boost in his in his approval ratings because of the virus till the whole George Floyd thing. I mean, whether you look at Australia, whether you look at the UK, even if you look at Angela Merkel, every government has sort of got what can be called a bump in the flag rating, right? And that is where I mean, again, people who have not so good feelings about the Modi government feel that the corona handling is really bad, etc. But I mean, as we saw in the last slide, there's clearly a feeling in India that, and maybe a large part of it comes from the early part, right, when there were very few cases in India compared to the rest of the world and everything. So that feel-good factor, I think, still remains, even though cases probably are increasing. And now I think people are probably a bit tired of it. They just want to move on from it and stop bothering so much about it.
Yeah. No, I mean, nobody can deny that, going into a lockdown as early as we did and being as responsive as we did, right, including, blocking the flights and so on and so forth, and travel and all of that, did not help us out, right? I mean, there's simply no case against it. And I think having a strong government at the center is an advantage in these kind of situations, because, it's I would say, I mean, it's every good decision is half chance, and you really need someone who is ballsy enough to take those to stomach that risk, right, and basically do what one is convinced to do, right? Okay.
Sorry to butt in there, but I mean, I've always been a critic of the lockdown, just to put it on record, since I just spoke about it and you praised the lockdown. But clearly, the majority of the people in the country share your views rather than mine. But yeah.
Well, nobody really likes a lockdown. Obviously, no one wants, the economy, business as usual, or life as usual to be put on hold. But I meant the broader point in terms of responding to the crisis, right? Because I mean, even up until I think late February or March, I mean, there were governments in the world which was not taking this as seriously. I mean, only when the death toll started increasing across Italy and elsewhere, people really started considering this as a serious threat. You have many such instances, and I'm really happy for as densely populated a country that as we are, and as limited as our healthcare infrastructure is. I think the first thing that we did was go take this crisis a lot more seriously. So that's where I was coming from. With you on whether we should lock down or not. Not really a huge fan, but I don't think something we could avoid. Ashish, any comments?
See, I will say that the two things stand out, not necessarily on the lockdown point of the lockdown, but two things stand out from the Mood of the Nation survey, right? One is that people implicitly in India trust the government. I feel that even if this was not a Modi government and let's say a Rahul Gandhi government, people would have still trusted it to do the right thing. Whether it would have done the right thing or not is a different judgment. Absolutely. Which you can make in a period of time. Like, I mean, that can only be judged in, let's say, 6 months, 12 months from now. But I think people implicitly expect governments to do the right thing in the time of a national crisis. That comes out for COVID, and that comes out for the China one also, which was there on the previous. Actually, this is a slide where you can see the fact that people are okay with the handling of China situation as well, the border situation, right?
Yeah.
The other part is that maybe on the economic side, because Indian economy has always been informal, not just in the structuring of registrations, etc., but also in behavior, right? A lot of things in India run on trust. All of us have been involved with small companies at different points, and you would see that raising of invoices, making payments, all of it is just trustworthy process. No one is going to sue anyone for missing like 2 days of payment cycle, right? Or if someone doesn't want to pay, they might even tell you that they cannot pay. You have to just wait for another 15 days. So there will be frustration, but the contract is essentially a very human contract, unlike in the West where a lot of, all the economic theory originates not from India, but from elsewhere. And the thing is that people think it's a big problem because it is not mirroring how it's there in other countries. But perhaps that's the anti-fragility which is needed in a over-governed bureaucratic setup where people can trust each other, and even if there's a problem, they accept it that there's a problem and then move on jointly without having to really make a case for judicial or government interventions.
Yeah. The other small minor point that I'd like to mention before we move on is the fact that I don't think across board, I don't think anyone appreciates politicking on matters of national crisis, right? Whether it's Corona, whether it's the Chinese issue. And that's where I think the opposition kind of lost the plot as well with going after the handling of the crisis as such. I think this is the time for us to all be united and back the government to the hilt. So, all right, moving on from this. We had the unfortunate case of the Air India crash yesterday, the Dubai to Calicut plane. We haven't seen such a disaster in a while, and this was crazy. Rohit, being from Kerala, how are the people responding there? What are some of your thoughts?
Carrie, it was obviously a very tragic day yesterday, right? In the sense that it was not just the air crash, but there was also a massive landslide in Munnar, where quite a few tea workers actually lost their lives, and quite a few people were still not found. I haven't tracked it so much to tell you the exact numbers, but to that extent, yesterday was one of the most tragic days in the history of Kerala for a very long time, right? And it's really been several August now for Kerala where things have gone wrong, right? Right from 2018 where there was a massive flood. 2019 itself saw some floods. Now 2020, there's COVID, there's some floods, and then now this air crash. So I think there's this general feeling that people are coming together and trying their best to help out. Like there were lots of visuals of locals coming in, helping the injured, cooperating with the NDRF to the best extent possible, etc. So that way, the state has sort of united and moved forward, especially at a time when actually things were getting quite fractious, both with COVID on one side and on the other side, this whole gold smuggling case that's been going on and on. So all of and which supposedly has some links to the top politicians also. So all of that has been moved to the side, and this tragedy has really brought everyone together. And yeah, condolences to everyone who has been hurt personally. And there's generally a feeling of despondency in the state, to be honest. I mean,
right. Ashish, how does this impact Air India? I mean, it seems like, the woes are piling on for Air India.
Yeah, I mean, it's a humongous tragedy. Second tragedy for Air India Express. Some accident happened in Mangalore in 2010 May. Another tabletop runway where a flight crashed, and I mean, there were no survivors then. I mean, thankfully, for people who have, I mean, there's some people who have survived this crash, which is in part a good news for those who survived. But it's a huge tragedy, and of course we don't know, so there's no point in speculating on what actually went wrong. I mean, there have been some media reports around. I mean, what we do know is the weather was bad, but that's what we know. Other than that, the theory essentially not confirmed yet, so no point in commenting on the causes of it. But I think the airline has to really, I mean, the government has to really think about what the future of the airline is. I don't think government should at this point be retaining. Although the challenge is that in the post-COVID world, even the buyers would shrink. I mean, the number of interested parties as well as the value which would have been unlocked through various assets, despite the airline being in debt, I think that now becomes a huge challenge for the government. But I think the hard call has to be taken. It is not about what money government will make. I think it's just fundamentally wrong to now be running an airline in this environment. And maybe some rationalization is needed in terms of the routes, etc., which the buying party can look at. But I think the government should take the hard call, irrespective of what valuation it gets, or what the financial structuring aspects of it is. I think it's a more fundamental call of not being in the business of running Air India.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a tragic event, and condolences to all of the people who've been affected. Moving on. Well, I mean, this happened. So you saw all of these guys testify before the Congress: Jeff Bezos, Tim Cook, Sundar Pichai, and Mark Zuckerberg. And almost coincidentally, they all had fantastic results. So Amazon posted its biggest ever profit, bang in the middle of the lockdown. Apple is now the world's most valuable publicly traded company. And Facebook has, I believe, doubled its Q2 profits and has about 3 billion monthly active users, right? It seems like there is no stopping big tech as such, Ashish.
Yeah, it looks like, and it also appears that the governments seem to be getting less antagonistic towards at least the big companies in this time. They seem to be making big investments. I mean, if you look at how the Reliance Jio investment queue has shaped up in the last, let's say, 10, 12 weeks, they've offloaded close to about 30% of their stake in Jio platforms. And sort of the buyers, of course, I mean, Facebook and Google are the big buyers. They could be other ones. The other ones are more financial investors. So looks like the governments have become more accepting of these firms, despite the various issues. And the issues are, of course, also real. I mean, the monopolization of the opinion more than anything else via these firms is a huge challenge for democratic traditions and the basic requirements of discourse in any democracy. I mean, US, India, of course, are at the forefront of that fight right now. But even US, it seems like the ByteDance properties could be sold to Microsoft as early as next 2-3 weeks. Or if not, they might just shut down the ByteDance operations in the US. So I think even within the tech fraternity, there seems to be like a two-tier structure emerging where some firms are trusted more than others, irrespective of the issues that they are facing. Right. And my sense is that not just the big 5-6 platforms in the US, but also the tech world in general will come out stronger from this crisis, because people have found, I mean, technology has been of immense use across on a day-to-day basis, even for folks who were not very conversant with it until 4 months ago. So my sense is that the tech businesses will come out very strong out of this, and the importance which they carry in day-to-day only magnify from here on, which also means that the dissonance about the positions they take on the issues of national, political, religious, social, cultural aspects will also increase, and it has to be addressed at a much faster pace than it was being done before the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple of points to pick up on what you mentioned. I think one, we are past the point of state interventionism. I think we're at the point of state activism, right? Because I think virtually every government in the world realizes how powerful these mediums are. And I don't think they're going to leave it to the vagaries of chance and a few people to sort of use that leverage, right? So that is one thing. And also, I mean, I think these platforms and technologies stopped being inanimate platforms and technologies when they started taking views on certain things, right? Whether it was deciding what news is fake and what news is true, so on and so forth, right? So I think it's a sort of a very complicated mix, and going forward, we will see some interesting policy emerge to sort of regulate some of their products and services and so on. Right. In fact, I mean, we did one episode with Anand Lunia and Rajiv Mantri on precisely this. Rohit, what are your thoughts on this, and how should India react to all of these tech companies now looking towards us for investments and so on?
Yeah, so Carrie, I think two, three parts to the issue, right? And what I will try to take on primarily is how it's just become a lot more political, right? Like you had this whole incident last week or a few days back, I'm not sure when exactly, where all of these guys were hauled up before the US Congress, right? And it was clear that the US Congress is sort of interested in what these companies are up to. They all had very different views to certain questions, which I think I'll leave that for this podcast, but sort of explained each company's attitude towards certain fundamental things, right? But I think one thing we need to pick up on right now is that these guys are becoming more into the business of taking on opinions, right? In the sense that they are doing more of deciding what is right, what is wrong, which is where a country like India really needs to start thinking. Because, as we all know, 2 days back, Twitter started labeling certain news channels as sponsored by Russian government, sponsored by Chinese government, etc. There was a whole debate on why it's not doing that for BBC and NPR and some of the other channels right now. Interestingly, it's not done it for Doordarshan also. And now, leaving aside the merits of whether Global Times is a news source you want to trust or not, this sort of goes into really subjective territory, right? Like tomorrow, what is it that says, where do you get to a situation where Twitter might just block Doordarshan? I mean, the point is you don't really know that, and linking that to this whole testimony in Congress, where all of them went and met the Congress, went and testified before the Congress. While, for instance, I think the Twitter CEO didn't even turn up to a meeting that someone in the Indian government wanted him to attend. Clearly shows that at the end of the day, they might all say that they're global companies, etc., etc. But some point, yes, they are American companies, right? And they are sort of beholden to the US government, and if not beholden, they're at least they will be influenced by the US government, because that's the point of a government, right? It influences people who live under its jurisdiction. That's why probably China, where increasingly people might think, did China have the right idea by creating its own internet?
Yeah.
Where everything is, obviously it has its whole this thing on censorship and all of that, but at least at an Indian level, do people need to start thinking about creating Indian alternatives? Is something that we need to look at. Obviously, geo platforms in some form or ways, another one, but something I think a lot of people need to start thinking more about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're past the point of this whole free market and stuff like that as well, right? And every nation, I think, is going to look at the pros and cons of entertaining some of these people. Yeah, I mean, we're going to see a lot of interesting developments in the months and years to come. All right, guys, I think that's a wrap. So this was the weekly from last week, August 2nd to August 8th. If you guys have some views about this, please feel free to interact with our social handles. We are at Bharatvaarta. Also check out our website. That's www.bharatvaarta.in. We'd love to hear from you. From Ashish,